How you doing, John? Are you all right?
Yes, sir. Everything's great. How are you?
Good. I've got you today to talk about a man who we both admire so much, Muhammad Ali. I've listened to you before, and you said you read the book, The Greatest, which is Muhammad Ali's biography. What was it about that book that got you into boxing and fascinated you about Muhammad Ali?
I guess I was about, 1975. So I was about 9 or 10 when I read the book. And, I was just captured by, like as I'm reading it, I'm picturing it as he's telling it. I'm picturing what he was going through. And I remember so much about it. But one thing that really stood out about it, I was about 10. And in it, he said that he never drank alcohol. And to show you how powerful, my connection with him and the connection to a role model and what a role model means. Now that was more than 40 years ago when I read the book, and till this day, I've never drank alcohol in my life, never tasted it. And it's essentially because I read that book, and so it just really stuck with me. But I remember so many other parts to the book. It's really, really interesting, not just for a boxing fan, but it's a story that even a non-boxing person, I think, would really appreciate.
Now, going on about his boxing career, he's had so many big fights. Nowadays, boxers may have 3 or 4 big fights. He had a whole career of defining fights.
Right.
His first one was probably when he won the Olympic Games, and he won the gold medal there. What interested me, and I think shaped, he was Cassius Clay at the time, was when he came back to America, he didn't quite get the reception he expected, did he?
Right. No, not at all. And that's covered in his book. He talks about coming back, and he had a friend of his, Ronnie O'Keefe, I think it was, and he he talks about going into a restaurant and they wouldn't let him eat there. And his friend's like, no, you don't understand. This is Cassius Clay, the gold medalist. And the guy behind the counter, he's like, listen, I don't care who it is. He doesn't eat here. And that really, that's the legend has it that Ali threw the medal off the 2nd Street Bridge in Louisville. That's the story. I don't know if it's 100% true or not, but just the fact that he said he did, and was told that, even if he didn't, but just the fact that he said he did, because of that it happened right after that of instance in the restaurant, that tells you how deep it was and how much I remember him saying, what good is a gold medal if I can't even get a hamburger in my own hometown restaurant? It makes no sense. What am I fighting for here? And so when I went to Louisville, I made it a point to visit that bridge.
That definitely seemed to have an effect on his life, as it would anybody. But on his boxing career, he was backed by a team of backers, wasn't he, in Louisville? And he won every fight and did well at the beginning, and then he came over to England and fought Henry Cooper. That was a very entertaining fight, and it really tested Ali. It was a momentous moment in his career, wasn't it?
Right. I mean, hey, Henry caught him, dropped him like a ton of bricks. I mean, and that's a big reason why so many people favored Liston later on, because Henry, he really hurt him bad. Ali was hurt when he hit the ground. He was hurt, but by the same token,
Henry's hammer, wasn't it? His left hook.
Yeah.
He wasn't the greatest fighter. He was a good fighter, but that left hook was lethal.
Yeah, no, lethal. A good word, lethal. And and just the fact that Ali was able to come back in the very next round and look good and stopping Cooper on cuts, it showed something. But that was a fight. Literally, that moment could have changed the history of the whole world, not just boxing. I mean, it could have changed everything.
And like every great star, they've got good people around them. And that fight, especially for me, showed the worth of Angelo Dundee in that corner at the end of the 4th round, didn't it?
Right, of course, yeah. And that's the thing. Like, people say, who's the best trainer? Who's the best trainer? Now, and they take it, who's the best pad guy? Who does the mitts good? As a trainer, Angelo Dundee, I don't know what he was like in the gym, but I know in that corner with with Sugar Ray Leonard and Muhammad Ali, he was a genius, and he was on the case 100% of the time. And, and that fight with Cooper is one glaring example of it.
Because the rumor was there was a cut in the glove, but he made it a bit bigger, which he said he never did. But
right.
It certainly gave Ali that recovery time.
Right. And who knows, but it makes for a good story.
Now, one thing that was a big part of Muhammad Ali's career was the mind games and how he belittled opponents. It always seemed in jest, but he seemed to know how to get under fighters' skin. And he knew how he was a product. It was said that he went watching a wrestler called Gorgeous George. And he was fascinated by how he was like an early day WrestleMania wrestler who was making a big fuss in the ring and against his opponent. And he watched and he took some of that, didn't he, into boxing?
Well, the story is not only did he see him, but he actually talked to him, was on a radio show with him. And Ali was the one who was kind of quiet. And Gorgeous George was on there talking like Ali did later. And actually, if you remember when Ali fought Joe Frazier, he said, if he beats me, I'll crawl across the ring and kiss his feet. That's actually, he stole that from Gorgeous George. Gorgeous George used to say that 10 years earlier when he was talking to his future wrestling opponents.
I think, present day, the only fighter that I've seen since who has many people have tried to do the trash talking and the mind games, but I think the only fighter I've seen remotely close is Tyson Fury, who people just can't quite figure him out.
Right. Well, who I thought was pretty good was Naseem Hamed. Yeah. I thought Hamed had some of that. He was I don't know if you've met Hamed. I met Hamed in person, and I was surprised at how friendly he was and how nice he was.
Naseem Hamed always said a similar thing to what Muhammad Ali said. It wasn't personal. For sure. And he said Ali was his greatest, role model. Who he looked up to and why he started boxing. Right.
Well, I have a friend of mine who Tariq Salmasi. If you remember, Tariq Salmasi was on the show The Contender, and he knew Hamed, and he told me that Hamed, really a nice guy, really a humble guy. It's just it was an act. And when I met Hamed, I kind of got that impression from him as well. But he did it brilliantly. He made a career out of being like Muhammad Ali.
So we push on now to when he got his title chance against Sonny Liston, who was unbeaten. Everybody was scared of Liston at that time. And Ali, I think he was a big outsider, wasn't he, for that fight?
Yeah, I believe he was a 7-1 underdog. I thought he won because a couple things. One, I think when they got face to face in the fight, I think he showed Liston that he was a lot bigger than Liston probably thought he was. They saw him as the smaller guy, but when they got in the ring, Ali had the height and the range. One thing I thought that his jab was beautiful in the fight, and also he let his hands go, not out of fear. Like he let his hands go out of confidence. And, a fighter can feel another fighter's vibe and energy. And I think Liston realized early on that this guy was not a kid. He was not scared. And he was, he was strong and putting his punches together well. And Liston hadn't faced that type of competition in a while. Guys that could fight, but also weren't afraid of him.
What did you make of the rematch, John, where the Phantom Punch and the famous photograph where Ali stood over him?
Obviously it's a huge controversy. You never know. But I do know this. If you watch the fight in slow motion, he caught Liston with a very sharp right hand. If you watch it in slow motion, you can see Liston's neck snaps and his chin goes to the right quickly, violently. That's how you knock somebody out. I think it was very similar to when George Foreman knocked out Michael Moore. It was a very similar, quick, short right hand like that. And the thing is, people say, "Oh well, Liston, he was falling down," and you have to understand. You can look at Tyson and Trevor Berbick and Montel Griffin and Roy Jones in the rematch. I mean, you don't know how a guy's going to react to being hurt and his legs act funny and his mind. Marlon Starling, when he got knocked out after the bell by Thomas Molinares, did an interview on HBO right after the fight. He seemed perfectly fine. And if you talk to Marlon today, he'll tell you he doesn't remember doing the interview at all. He didn't even know he was doing it. He remembers being hit after the bell, and then the next thing he remembers is being in the cab, the taxi cab, the next morning, leaving the hospital. So
I remember that fight. The bell had gone, and he was virtually walking off, wasn't he? And
he
came in.
Yeah, the bell rang, and Molinares threw the punch and knocked him out. And he said that he doesn't remember. He doesn't remember being on HBO talking to Larry Merchant. He has no idea that happened. So you don't know how a guy's going to react. I think Liston, he was out of it, but I do think he was caught with a very sharp shot.
So then Ali went on and had a lot of successful defenses. I think his best performance, probably the best performances of his career. I know you can judge it against different opponents and say that, but I just thought he had power, speed, movement, everything was against Cleveland Williams. He looked fantastic that night.
Right. He looked like Roy Jones looked years later. Like he looked like a heavyweight Roy Jones. Just the combinations, the defense, the moving the head, the short, sharp combinations. He was brilliant, and he was brilliant. There was fights like with Ernie Terrell. I mean, he abused Terrell for 15 rounds. Didn't get tired. His conditioning was great. Put the punches together. I mean, I think
Terrell who wouldn't call him Muhammad Ali. He only called him Cassius Clay.
Right, exactly. Right. He said, "What's my name?" And I think that version of Muhammad Ali, 1966, 1967, I think that's the best heavyweight in history.
So he went on, and then he came up against Zora Foley, and he didn't know it at the time, but it was his last fight, wasn't it, before he stood up and wouldn't join the US Army, and he had 3.5 years out of boxing. What can that do to a fighter, John?
Oh, I mean, it could mentally as much as physically. You could lose your hunger. You lose your taste for boxing. A million things could happen. You could, you take that love away from the game. You're not able to box. You're not able to fight. You're not able to feed that fire. You don't know how a guy will react. And guys have retired. Good fighters have retired under much less distressing circumstances just because they lost it. And, but he stayed with it, and, he came back. People really have to realize when he came back after 3.5 years against Jerry Quarry, Jerry Quarry was a top-rated guy. He wasn't like a tune-up fight by any stretch. He was a top 5 ranked contender.
And that led to his first fight against Joe Frazier, where he tried to win the world title back, and his first defeat. What did you make of that fight?
I always say in that fight, two episodes in that fight will show you everything you need to know about Muhammad Ali. One is the 11th round, where he took a brutal beating. Like today, they would have stopped that fight for sure. The referee would have stopped it, and Ali would have lost on an 11th round knockout. He was all over the ring. He could barely stand up, taking huge shots. At one point, he took a left hook just as good as the one that dropped him in the 15th, and he almost went down, but he held himself up. For him to make it through that round against Joe, who was on fire that round, and to make it through is incredible. The will that it took to make it through is incredible. Now, the other thing, the 15th round, you're exhausted. I mean, even if you shadow box for 15 rounds, you're going to be very tired. Now, you're in the biggest fight in history. The emotional toll is on you, the physical, the mental. The 15th round, he gets dropped by a titanic left hook, huge left hook. Not only doesn't he get knocked out, but he gets up before the referee can count. He gets up immediately, hits the ground, rolls over, pushes himself up. People have to realize, I mean, a lot of guys would take, they take 5, 6, 7 seconds. They take almost to the count of 10. Ali got up. He could have took a knee for 6 seconds and got some rest, but his instinct was to get up. And that told me as much as I need to know about Muhammad Ali as almost anything in his career.
He did handle defeat well, didn't he? I mean, I remember one of the images was Houdini Brown crying when he lost that decision. But Muhammad Ali came out with a statement, didn't he? No one's died today. I've lost the boxing match. And it showed, like Manny Pacquiao in many ways, that Manny Pacquiao, when he got knocked out by Marquez, was like, if you don't want to get knocked out, don't box. And Ali seemed to have that strength of character where he was just like, let's move on.
Right. Well, and people missed that. I'm glad you caught that, because a lot of people missed that about Muhammad Ali. They wanted him to be devastated by the loss. And after the fight, and he's, hey, people lose, things happen in this world, but it's how you react to it. And that's just, to me, another reason why, beyond all the hoopla and the loud talking and the poems and everything, I mean, that's why as a man, he could be seen as a huge role model. In moments like that, he really showed his character. And I think a lot of people missed that. Like you didn't, but I think a lot of people missed that because they're diverted by other stuff about him. But, he showed himself in those moments, and he showed good things.
I mentioned Houdini Brown there. How important do you think he was to Muhammad Ali?
I think he was vital. They fed off each other, and Ali really didn't have anybody else in the camp like that. That was kind of like him. Dundee was a great trainer, great motivator, great cut man, all of that. But Dundee wasn't a joker, like in that realm. So Ali had a guy like a buddy, and a guy on his level, and a guy like a straight man. You have the comedy team, Abbott and Costello, and they need each other. And I think, Bandini was maybe more so than people realize. He was a vital part of that Ali's success.
Now, when he lost that time, now, these days, you wouldn't probably box for a year, would you, if you'd lost a fight like that? They were straight back in, and he fought top contenders. He wasn't having easy fights. And he lost a few fights after that to Ken Norton. Now, he proved to be really Ali's bogeyman, didn't he? What was it about Ken Norton that gave Ali so much trouble?
He just had that awkward stuff. Some guys just have that herky-jerky style, that way of moving their hands a certain way, holding their hands a certain way. And Ali just couldn't get his timing down. He couldn't time Norton, and Norton wasn't afraid of him. I think the story goes that Norton, if he fought the big punchers, he had problems. But Ali wasn't a big puncher, and he was motivated. So Ali didn't have that edge over him that certain guys did. And a lot of fighters have that one guy who gives them problems, and that was Ali's guy.
I mean, Ali, it showed his strength again in the first fight, because he got his jaw broke in the second round, I think he said, against Norton, and he carried on for the full 12 rounds. Now, I think sometimes the body remembers when it's been injured like that, and you're never quite the same. Can't say that with Ali, can we?
No, I mean, he came back. It wasn't that long later when he beat Norton in the rematch. I mean, and that's the type of guy. That's another aspect. He came back right away to get the rematch against the guy who beat him, and that's what he wanted to do. And he did that, and he won. So I think it's just another indication of the type of athlete and man that he was.
So then he had quite a few fights, and he ended up fighting Joe Frazier again, which he got the decision, and ended up fighting George Foreman. And we all know what happened there. What a great fight that was.
Right. You know, one thing, I'll tell you this much. When I was growing up, all growing up, from hearing from my father and different things, I was always under the impression that Foreman murdered him, you know, the whole 8 rounds, and was beating on him and beating on him, and Ali just covered up and let him work and wore him out and knocked him out. Like that's the image I always had. If you watch that fight, Ali was winning that fight. He was ahead at the time of the stoppage. You know, I think Ali looked very good in the fight. He just had Foreman's number. I think Foreman just was psyched out by the fact that he couldn't really visibly hurt Ali, and Ali just was there talking to him and psychologically breaking him down and physically breaking him down, and you know, and he won. And it's, you know, it could very well be the biggest victory in the history of boxing. You know, maybe Tyson and Douglas. You know, it's one of maybe one of those two, but it's no worse than the top 3 probably biggest victories in history.
I mean, it must have hurt Foreman so much. They were in Africa, and he got the whole of the crowd supporting him, Ali, all shouting, Ali Bombay, Ali kill him. And he was talking to him the whole way through. And Foreman quite openly says now, didn't he, that it was irritating him so much.
Yeah, you know, and that's part of boxing. You know, you have to be able to, it's a lot more than just punching people and taking punches. I mean, there's different aspects of boxing that are so, you know, geared up towards certain people. Certain people could deal with certain things and certain people can't. And Ali, in many days in his career, he found the weaknesses in people. He knew what to say to them. He knew how to annoy them. You know, he knew how to use psychology against a guy as strong and feared as George. And, you know, it was really brilliant stuff if you think about it.
He never showed fear, did he? Because
No.
even against Liston and Foreman, ferocious punches.
Right.
The way he boxed,
I mean, even against
there was
Holmes,
no fear.
Even against Holmes. I mean, when Ali knew, of course, Ali knew he had nothing left. You know, he knew that before the fight, and he knew something was wrong. And even in that fight, he didn't show fear. He wouldn't go down. He wouldn't quit. He wouldn't take a knee. He wouldn't, you know, he wouldn't give up. And even before the fight in the ring, he was trying to taunt Holmes. You know, he was trying to do everything he could to possibly pull a magic trick. But fear just apparently was not a part of his makeup.
Now that led to the third Joe Frazier fight, which is possibly one of the most brutal fights I think I've seen. And Ali said himself, didn't he, it was the closest he's known to dying. And he collapsed shortly after Frazier was stopped by his corner. I think it was Eddie Futch, wasn't it? Stopped the fight and said, people will remember what you've done here today, son. Frazier obviously didn't want to stop, and Ali collapsed shortly after. That must have taken a lot out of both men.
Oh, I'm sure psychologically, mentally, emotionally, you know, I could understand that feeling of wanting to collapse. But, you know, they're fighting out there. It's hot where they were fighting. The emotion, the pace. Joe was ripping the body shots. You know, it's just another indication of Ali's heart and will and desire and mostly his character. Because the fact is, I mean, some guys make it look easy. You know, the way Ali came through that fight, even though he was looking tired, you know, his best round was probably the round before they stopped it. Like, he was ripping punches. He looked fresh as a daisy. He looked young. You know, so to perform at that level against that level of guy at that stage in the fight and at that age of your life is super, super, super impressive.
I think everybody would like to see Frazier and Ali finish after that fight. But he didn't, did he? He carried on and lost to Leon Spinks, but then won the title back for the third time.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny. Even, like, Ali beat some good guys after the Frazier fight. I mean, when he was essentially shot, like two things I noticed. One, if you look as far back as the Foreman fight, to me, you can tell Ali's speech has been affected. You can hear his voice dragging a little bit on certain words, and he started to get that raspy voice that he didn't have when he was just a few years younger. And also, even when he was up on his toes, you know, against Ron Lyle and Ernie Shavers, he was beating these guys who were top contenders, but you could see he didn't have the same bounce in his step. He wasn't as fluid as he was before. So, you know, everything Ali did after the third Frazier fight, the Thriller Manila, was just extra. It was just him running at half speed, and he was still able to do these things and beat these guys. But he was obviously, as good as he was not the man that he was before the third Frazier fight.
Well, what was your favourite Muhammad Ali performance, John?
To me, for different reasons. Even though he lost the fight, I liked the first fight with Frazier. I really liked some of the stuff he did in the fight. I liked the things he showed when he was impaired, like the 11th round. I liked the third Frazier fight. I liked the Foreman fight, Ernie Terrell fight, Cleveland Williams. I liked the first Liston fight. I thought he was superb, you know, Superman in that fight. He was awesome in that fight. There's a sequence against I believe it's Ron Lyle, where he's late in the fight when he stops Ron, and you know, he broke him down and he let his hands go in combination. You know, he was looking like a young man again, looking very sharp. You know, there's so many. I mean, there's so many moments, not just the whole fight, but moments in every fight where he always had an episode, 1 round, 2 rounds, parts of a round where he showed you something brilliant in terms of his boxing.
So what is it about him that people love? I mean, if you look at him in a boxing stance, he was in so many great fights. But you could say, look at other fighters and say they've got better left up, better this, better that. What was it about Ali? Was it the whole package? Was it the man behind the box?
It was the whole package, right? It was everything combined. You know, he found a way to win. Now, I'm saying I'm not against Mayweather by any stretch, but here's the comparison I'll give you. Mayweather was 50-0, great boxer, talent, you know, just skills, right? But here's the thing. If you watch one Mayweather fight, you've seen every Mayweather fight there's ever been. He fights the same way. He beats you with boxing and his formula that way. Muhammad Ali beat certain guys at their own game. Some guys he had to take abuse to beat. Some guys he had to get hurt. He had to give up rounds in order to get them. He had to dig down. And to me, that's more of a test, and it's more impressive. You know, I'm sure Muhammad Ali could have boxed. He had the ability to box everybody and move and dance, and he could have done that. For better or worse, he chose different strategies, and he was forced to, you know, like I say, when he came back against Henry Cooper, you know, that was a Titanic shot that he got dropped with. So to come back from that, you know, guys like Ali make certain things look easy, but I know that's not easy. So he had the character that a guy like Teddy Atlas might talk about. Like when Teddy Atlas is talking about character, he's talking about Muhammad Ali.
How would he go on against some of today's fighters? I mean, the one I'm thinking of, he's retired obviously, but Mike Tyson, how could you see that fight?
You know, I honestly, as great as Mike was, you know, I'm a big Mike Tyson guy, big fan in his prime, but Ali, the total package, and people have to realize it's not just the fight, it's the weeks leading up to the fight. It's the pre-fight press conferences and the interviews, and you know, you're listening. Mike Tyson's going to be there listening to Ali and showing no fear. Like Ali has no fear. There's nobody ever that could say in Ali's face that they had no fear. There was no apprehension. Ali would be the first guy, and I think psychologically, as well as his style, I think he would beat Mike and I think pretty convincingly.
Yeah. What about Tyson Fury? Those press conferences would have been interesting,
Yeah.
wouldn't they?
Well, yeah, it would be interesting, and I tell you, like it's you know, a lot of people will be upset that I say these type of things, but it is what it is. I mean, these guys today, their athleticism and their, you know, the height that they have and the strength, you know, they're a problem. I mean, you know, Tyson Fury would give Ali problems. He certainly would. You know, he can fight, and he's very tall, and he's very long, and he lets his hands go, and he wouldn't be afraid either. So, you know, I mean, I like to think Ali was the best ever, pound for pound. I mean, you know, as a heavyweight, the best ever. And, you know, in 66, 67. And he was big enough to fight with these guys, even though they're much bigger. But, you know, he'd have problems just because of these guys. You know, you talk about Lennox Lewis and Tyson Fury. You know, Ali would have problems with that kind of height and that kind of confidence and athleticism.
What strikes me, I got drawn into Muhammad Ali reading the same book you did, John. Now, you're in North America, I'm here in England. And one of the things that struck me was when he refused to go and join up for the Vietnam War. Being at the top of your sport like that, he knew it would have a negative effect, which it did publicly at the time. But he put his own personal beliefs above everything, didn't he? And you can only admire people like that.
Right. I mean, it's unbelievable what he did. You know, a lot of guys. I mean, I respect anybody who takes a stance. And there's guys, you know, Kurt Flood in baseball. You know, he took a stance, and you know, Colin Kaepernick in football. But you know, these guys weren't the best in the world, and they weren't in their prime, and they weren't. Forget about the money. They weren't losing their prime years, and they weren't facing jail. You know, there's a big difference. Like Ali knew he was facing jail, and he knew he was facing losing his prime of his career, which he did. I mean, he certainly did. There's no disputing that. That is unbelievable in itself, that he would choose one or the other. You know, that he chose to do that at that time, because he, like I say, he could have went to the Army and he could have done exhibitions. You know, he could have done the same way Joe Louis did, and everything would have been fine. But he went, you know, he did what he did, and it's you know, you have to admire, even if you don't like Ali, you can't sit there and say you don't admire that. You wouldn't want to have your son have that in his DNA.
Well, I think we both would say to any young boxer now, read The Greatest by Muhammad Ali. But which fight would you advise them to watch? If they've just never seen Ali before, which would you say take a look at?
You got to watch Cleveland Williams. I mean, just that fight by itself. Cleveland Williams and Ernie Terrell. But Cleveland Williams, I mean, there's never been a heavyweight who could let his hands go like that. You know, combinations, sharp combinations, you know, putting punches together as fluidly as a Roy Jones did at 168 pounds. There's never been a heavyweight like that. Like Tyson Fury puts punches together, but he doesn't do it with the fluidity like Muhammad Ali did in his day. So, you know, if you're going to watch Ali and say, okay, I need to see Ali at his offensive best, that's the fight, I think, Cleveland Williams or Ernie Terrell.